Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today I was going to go over Pravraja Yoga, which is a planetary combination for life focus, and this is from a Vedic astrology or Jyotish perspective. So go ahead. If you're new to Vedic astrology or my videos, you can find all of my teaching videos in the concepts playlist. And wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means I have a teaching video on that subject, so you can go deeper into it. And for this particular talk, there's several you might want to view if you haven't already. So there are North, South, and East Indian style charts. I use North Indian style charts in my work. And that video, if you use other charts, that can help you convert charts if that's interesting to you. There's also Introduction to Navigating a Birth Chart, the Lugna, also known as the Ascendant Rising Sign First House. Introduction to the Constellations of Rashis, Natural Benefic and Malefic Planets, Planetary Directional Strength or Digbala, Symbolism of the Planets and Grahas. There's a whole playlist on each planet, so you'll see as we go deeper into the kind of details of Pravraja Yoga that knowing which planets are involved in this yoga are important. And then I also have a growing playlist of videos just on different yogas, planetary yogas or combinations. So you can check that out if you're looking for more yogas. All right. So what is Pravraja Yoga? Well, first of all, it's a sannyasa yoga. So sannyasa means renunciate, and yoga means planetary combination. Um, actually, it's classically in Jyotish, this is a yoga or planetary combination indicating like especially a spiritual, religious renunciate or ascetic, potentially ascetic. Um, so Pravraja, Prava means hovering or soaring, and Raja means royalty or king. So this is somebody who kind of soars or hovers above, um, I guess, the world, and that's what a renunciate does, right? They're not entirely engaged in the world the way most of us are. And there's this kind of royal status on some level is attached to it, even if there may not be money, for example, or material gains or goods, although that's not necessarily true for all people who have a sannyasa yoga, as we'll see here. Um, and so, again, there are spiritual and religious implications in classical Jyotish or classical times with this type of yoga. That's not always the case. Uh, and you'll see again when we get into the classical text or the Shastra that there are different reasons why this might show up in somebody's chart in terms of it not being spiritual religious for somebody. But whether it's spiritual or not, it indicates a very tight focus of somebody's life, an area of focus in somebody's life. So that's important. So how is this yoga formed? How would you recognize this yoga? Well, there's several criteria here. One, and this is probably the most obvious, and so it kind of makes the Pravraja yoga easy to spot in somebody's chart. If there are four or more planets in one house, and this is the exception to this is Rahu and Ketu. So the other seven of the nine classical planets involved here, this would create a Pravraja yoga. Another way to see a Pravraja yoga or meet the criteria for Pravraja yoga is three planets in an auspicious house. Now, this is coming from the classical text, the Phala Deepika, which is what I was looking at, specifically chapter 26, I think. But to me, an auspicious house, and it didn't define what an auspicious house is, but I believe an auspicious house would typically be considered a Kendra or Trikona. So the Kendras are the four squares in the middle here of a North Indian style chart. The Trikonas are the three kind of the top square, and then the two kind of um, triangle pieces, like in this chart on the side. The top square has a three in it. That's both a Kendra and Trikona. If you go to the triangle on the bottom left, that has a seven in it, that's a Trikona. And if you go to the bottom triangle on the right that has 11 and Saturn in it, that's another Trikona. So the three trichonas in this particular chart are the ones that have 3, 7, and 11. That's the 3, 7, 11 indicate constellations. So the third constellation, which is Gemini, the seventh constellation, which is Libra, and the 11th constellation, which is Aquarius. So these numbers might change, but the houses that are interesting trichonas does not. Okay, so you could have a Pravraja yoga if you have 3 planets. Um, in an auspicious house. And I also include, with a question mark here, the second house, which in this chart would be the house that has a little 4, the 4 indicating the fourth constellation or Cancer, because the second house is considered not a negative house. So, and there are a lot of yogas that are formed with the second bhava, like Saraswati yoga and Dana yogas and ADK yogas and that sort of thing. So, in my mind, auspicious yogas are Kendra Trikona in the second house, but and I don't read Sanskrit, so I wouldn't know the nuances of language to let me know what an auspicious house is. But I think that this is probably okay. Um, and then the other criteria potentially is that if the moon is in a house of Mars, meaning Scorpio or Aries, um, in the D9 Amsha, so this is a divisional chart, and Saturn is either conjoined with that moon or aspecting that moon, that's another criteria for meeting the Pravraja Yoga. So you'll see in this is that Saturn is a pretty important planet, and the reason why is that Saturn is, there's a lot of distance, coldness, structure, and for somebody to be a renunciate, they have to pull away from society on some level, even if it's not physically. Um, that you'll see, like, at least with a couple charts that I'm gonna, use examples in this talk, there is a pulling away. Even if somebody seems to be right in the middle of the world, there is this kind of pulling away, and there's a lot of discipline involved, and that's all Saturn. And then the fourth way here that this Pravraja can be formed is that you have Moon in the house of Saturn, which is Capricorn or Aquarius. In the D3 Amsha or subdivisional chart, the Drakana, and that's conjoined or aspected by Saturn or Mars. Mars is also potentially an important planet because Mars is somebody who goes against the grain. Mars is a rebel, and so they're not going to be a conventional sort of person. They also tend to be independent. The other thing with Moon probably being important is the Moon is the mind and the emotional mind. And so it's like, where is somebody's mind at? Is somebody's mind resting in the material world and gaining material success? Climbing up, the corporate ladder? Probably not. Um, and also, where are their emotions? Like, where is their true heart? And you'll see that these folks tend to have again, when you have 3 or 4 planets in one house, that's a lot of energy. And again, if we're talking about classical planets, there are 9 classical planets, and then if we exclude Rahu and Ketu, that's 7. So if you get 3 or 4 out of 7, that's like most of your planets, about 50%, close to 50, around 50% or more. Some people have more than 4 planets, which is very unusual, but that's a possibility. The other thing to know about a Pravraja yoga is that since you have all these planets together, the way to figure out what kind of path the renunciate, the person might take, or what sort of focus in life they may have, if they're not a renunciate, maybe they're still, deeply involved in the material world, is that you look for the strongest planet in that sort of conglomeration. The other thing is that if the 10th house lord is involved in the Pravraja, that may also give an indication of what the likely path is for that person. Okay. And I'm not an expert in Western astrology. I know a bit, but there is this concept of stellium in Western astrology. And so I think there's some similarities here, although I don't think it's a full overlap. So the definition of stellium from a Western, as far as I could find, this definition for stellium in Western astrology is 3 planets in the same house. And I don't think I didn't see any indications of like positive or negative house. And this is so they also have sort of an exclusion here. So this is 4 houses if we're talking about the sun and the moon. So if in that packet of 4 planets, the sun and the moon is involved, that would be okay. That would constitute a stellium. But if you have 3 planets and one of the planets, one or more of the planets is sun or the moon, that doesn't qualify as a stellium. So there is some sort of similar-ish concept in Western astrology, but not exactly the same, it doesn't seem. Um, and the way they define it is a little bit different. The other thing is that there is also with the stellium, there is a similar indication of a focus in life, but I wasn't seeing, from what I was looking or finding when I was reviewing this, there didn't seem to be the same sort of spiritual or ascetic type of energy associated with the stellium. Okay. So this is an introduction here, and this is pretty much what I was taught. But I'm going to get into more here. I'm going to go into the Shastra, into Phala Deepika, to get a little bit more nuance to this. Before we do this, and what I presented here is already a lot. Like this will take you a long way. But if we look at the chart I have here, so I was just like, so again, this Pravraja yoga, I don't think, at least in the States, I don't think there are as many people going into like a very deeply spiritual path. Like I was reading that there are less um, spiritual leaders, renunciates going into that path, like nuns and priests and things like that. So probably the Pravraja yoga is becoming more of this just, area of life focus type energy. But I was just like, well, who might have, I was just thinking, who might have one of these Pravraja yogas? And so I thought, well, Pope Francis might. And so I pulled up his chart. And so on the first try, he has a Pravraja yoga. So he qualifies, right? I mean, he's a renunciate, but he's also surrounded by a lot of material wealth. I mean, if you've ever visited the Vatican, it's pretty astounding, all the really precious art and maps and things that they have. And if you've ever, and the Vatican itself, the building itself, oh, the gold and marble. I mean, it's like a palace, really. Um, so he is clearly not walking down the path of a renunciate who's like, in a loincloth with his alms, cup, waiting for change to fall in his, well, So, and so I'm not going to get into his chart deeply here, and probably I think I might actually do that in my December planetary transit analysis because he does have an interesting chart. But if we just focus on the Pravraja yoga here, you can see circled in his 7th house is Rahu, Jupiter, Sun, and Mercury. Now we're excluding Rahu and Ketu. So if we exclude Rahu and Ketu, that means that there are just 3 planets here: Sun, Jupiter, Mercury. But they are in a Kendra, so they are in an auspicious house. So this would qualify as a Pravraja yoga. Okay. I did look at his D9 and D3, and he doesn't have the moon in a house of Mars, or I should say Rashi of Mars, and he doesn't in the D9, and he doesn't have moon in a Rashi of Saturn in the D3, at least not with the conjoined or aspecting Saturn or Mars. So he doesn't satisfy the 3rd and 4th criteria, but the 2nd criteria he does. And then to note here, again, if we're looking at strongest planet, his strongest planet here is that Jupiter. Now, his Jupiter is combust, so it's not seen, but it is Jupiter in its own sign. So that makes it the strongest here of the 4 planets. And the other thing is that the 10th Lord is also Jupiter. So that gives even more indication that Jupiter's important. So what does Jupiter indicate? Jupiter indicates things like education, learning, law. And as the Pope, he essentially is the head governor of the laws of the Catholic faith. And he's an educator, but he also like sets the rules and makes the rules and changes the rules. So he's, that's what he does. The other thing to note in this chart is that this Mars in the 4th house aspects into this Pravraja yoga. And so Mars and Sun, Mars is a leader, leadership energy, like CEO, hands-on leader type, and also head of the army, commander in chief. And Sun is the king or the president, those sorts of energies. And so he has two. And what was amazing to me is he has two leadership planets, with their energy in this seventh house in this Pravraja yoga. So that's a lot of fire, a lot of energy here. Plus, he has a Rahu, which again, it doesn't meet the criteria. Rahu doesn't add to the criteria for a Pravraja yoga, but Rahu is all about ambition. And then he's got this, Swa Jupiter in its own house. That's a lot of energy and focus. The other thing is that this Jupiter creates a Bhavat Bhavam, which is a concept I don't think I talk about much on the channel, but the 10th house lord has gone 10 houses away. And so there's going to be this like repetitive energy. So there's even like more energy here. And the thing is, the seventh house is really, how would I say, it's a house of independent business. So, like entrepreneurship type energy, which might be a little bit surprising, but I think I mentioned in other videos that I typically see people who are like heads of state have a lot of entrepreneurship energy, because essentially what they're doing is they're taking over as captain of the ship, and they might steer the ship in a different direction. But and even though he has a long reign, potentially, he's not going to be the only one. Like he will be the captain of the ship for a certain amount of years, and then somebody else is going to take over the ship. The other thing for him in terms of work and career is that he has this like Saturn that's Swa in the ninth house. So the ninth house indicates religion, and so Saturn being in Aquarius, that indicates more like mental energy, because again he's got Jupiter and Mercury here, two education planets, and Saturn is law, structure, tradition. So um, yeah, so he could also potentially have been in government, I think. But with his Jupiter being this strong, he headed down more of a kind of spiritual road rather than a bureaucratic road, which Saturn in Aquarius in the ninth house could indicate. Um, yeah. So anyway, so this is Pope Francis who has a Pravraja yoga. So I mentioned I was gonna. Oh, I said chapter 27. I meant chapter 26, I think, but it was actually chapter 27, as you can see here. This is from Phala Deepika. So this is more kind of detail and information about the Pravraja yoga and how it plays out. Probably more than you need, because again, if you just spot a Pravraja yoga, which are pretty easy to spot, then that already gives you some information. But if you're looking for nuance, this is it. So when the 10th house lord is in a Pravraja yoga and located in a Kendra Trikona, then the native attains emancipation, meaning that they've applied to a holy order of some kind and that they've reached success. Because you might, you might be spiritual but not apply to a holy order, or you might apply to a holy order and, I don't know, get excommunicated or something like that. Some priests do that, like who comes to mind, like Thich Nhat Hanh. And I don't remember, I did go through his chart, but I don't remember if he has a Pravraja yoga or not. But yeah, so from Pope Francis's chart, the 10th Lord, Jupiter, is in the Pravraja yoga, and the Pravraja yoga is in a Kendra. So he's clearly been successful. He applied to an order, he got accepted, and then he's successful. I mean, he's Pope, right? So if end of the sign rising, so their Lugna, is owned by Benefic, and Jupiter occupies a Kendra Trikona, the native attains emancipation. End of a sign. So if we're looking at, if we're referring back to Pope Francis's chart, I looked it up. The end of his sign. So his rising sign is Gemini. And it was right in the middle, I believe, his rising sign. I don't know how specific his birth time was, though, because I did see a copy of his original birth certificate, and it just listed, it wasn't specific to the minute. But the thing is that the rising sign, I think, is accurate because there was about an hour on either side of the given birth time where he would still be a Gemini rising. So he's probably a Gemini, and isn't owned by a benefic. Well, if we're looking at yogas, yes, Mercury is considered a benefic when we consider yogas. It's not always considered a benefic when we do birth chart and house analysis, but it is considered benefic if we're looking at yogas. So, so almost he meets this criteria. I think he's, I don't know if you consider the end the second half, because I think he's close to the second half. So maybe he meets the second criteria here. Okay, if strongest planet is conquered in planetary war, Graha Yuddha, this cancels the yoga. Well, his planets are not in planetary war, so it doesn't cancel the yoga. Um, more benefics and auspicious houses. Well, it's definitely an auspicious houses in an auspicious house. He has Mercury and Jupiter there. Jupiter's the strongest planet by a couple different, because it's also the 10th lord and it's Swa. So he has a super strong benefic there. He has a secondary benefic there. Um, and he has two malefics. I would say he's probably more benefic than not. So if it is more benefic than not, then Holy Order will be more auspicious and revered. Well, he's the Pope, right? So he gets to travel around in his Pope mobile. He may not be the favorite of everybody. I think he's probably a pretty contentious figure in this day and age, but a lot of people see him as, very high up there. So could be worse for him, right? So, okay, if the dispositor of the moon is only aspected or conjoined by Saturn, his moon is in the 8th house with Venus, and it is not aspect or conjoined by Saturn. So this does not he does not meet this criteria. But apparently, if this criteria is met, then the person will become a member. I will become a Janmadipa ascetic. And I don't know what Janmadipa is. I looked and looked and I couldn't find it, and it just kept referring me back to the Phala Deepika. So I don't know if this is a specific order of asceticism or not. If anybody knows, let me know. But some sort of ascetic. So again, ascetic, that means that they're probably not surrounded by wealth the way that Pope Francis is. So maybe if he did meet this criteria, he wouldn't be surrounded by gold and marble and precious maps of the world, from the Middle Ages, that were, created in the Middle Ages. So what else do we have here? If the moon is weak, waning or new or eclipsed, and aspected by the Lugnatia. So, is the moon weak in his chart? Well, it's a newish moon because the moon is moving away from the sun. It's in a negative house. It is growing, so that's some strength. Is it eclipsed? No, but it looks like he just was very close to being eclipsed because it's only a few days away from being eclipsed. And is it aspected by the Lugnatia? The Lugnatia is the ruling planet of the Lugna, or the ruling planet of the chart, which is Mercury. So, is the moon weak? It's not great, but could be worse. And is it aspected by Lugnatia? No, it's not. So, he does not meet this criteria, but if this criteria is met, then the person would be wretched, ascetic, devoid of wealth, company, who will get meals with difficulty. Now, this is not Pope Francis. So it seems to work for his chart, Then the last one here, if a Raj Yoga exists, so that's another kind of royalty power yoga. Raj Yogas or power yogas exists in the above yogas. And I put question mark here, because it in the text it said, exists in the above yoga, but in my mind, these were sort of different yogas, but this, the Phala Deepika might consider this all one yoga, in which case this S question mark does not apply. But so if a Raj Yoga exists in the above yoga, let's put it that way, the way the Phala Deepika does, um, this will remove the bad effects, and the person will become a lord of the earth, be initiated into asceticism, be virtuously inclined, receive respect, and be revered by kings. Well, the thing is, Pope Francis, that Jupiter in its own sign creates a Hamsa yoga, which is a Raj yoga. So, again, you can see that Pope Francis, stepped away from these potential criteria that would lead him to an ascetic life where he's again begging on the streets, living off the grace of God, rather than, showing up for a 9 to 5 job. Um, but he's again surrounded by a lot of wealth. The other thing about his chart I did get into is that he has Mars aspecting into his 11th house of income, although he also has that massive Saturn aspecting into his 11th house. So Mars will be swa there bringing it up, but Saturn is debilitated in Aries. So there's going to be a mixed bag there. So in terms of he will have a lot of money and there will be difficulties and delays. So it might be that because he was teaching theology and all these sorts of things for many years before he stepped into the popeship. Um, so he was an ascetic for many years, and now he's surrounded by wealth. So um, the other thing is that he has the moon aspecting his second house of assets, um, and his second house is Cancer. So he has moon aspecting. So he has moon swa in the second house, and he has Mars swa aspect in the 11th house. So there is going to be a lot of money for him, plus these other criteria. Indicating that again, he's not going to be somebody who's like, begging with a cup on the street, as that type of ascetic type person, or living off foraging in the, off the land or something, or living in the hills chanting mantra. That's another kind of ascetic type lifestyle, right? So yeah. Um, so more, and this gets into the planets that are involved in the Pravraja. So if the strongest planet is, and this was again all from the Phala Deepika, chapter 27. So if Mars is involved, and this is the strongest planet, this creates a Sakya Pravraja yoga. So the person may be ill-behaved, and I put a question mark here because I don't know what that means. Like what sort of ill-behaved, types thing are we looking at here? Ascetic Buddhist, which I was actually a little surprised to see, and then be knowledgeable about base spells. So again, a question mark here because this sounds a little sketchy. And also, like, I don't know, somebody might be offended if they are Buddhist. Again, I'm not advocating this. This is just what the Phala Deepika says. And I was also surprised because what I've seen with charts is when I see Mercury in its own sign, that's a signal to me that somebody's interested in Buddhism. But this Pravraja yoga is a whole different level of asceticism and, focus in somebody's life, whether it's religious or spiritual or more material. Um, Base spells. So I don't know if this is somebody who, because there are people who get involved in religion and spirituality, and maybe they go off the rails a bit, and at some point they rebel against the training that they have, and so maybe that's a Mars type Pravraja yoga. If the Mars is the strongest planet, yeah, it could be. So then we have Mercury as the strongest planet. This is a Jivaka Pravraja Yoga. So this is somebody who's garrulous, gluttonous, mendicant. Somebody who talks a lot, eats a lot, and they're begging for alms, and no knowledge of various schools of philosophy. So this is also a little bit, counterintuitive because again, when Mercury typically is strong in somebody's chart, that means that they're very knowledgeable. Um, but again, the other planets involved might throw this off. Because the other thing is, it's not just Mercury in its own sign, but you have three other, at least two, if not three other planets. Um, and so, especially if maybe they're negative malefic planets, this would be more of the style of Pravraja Yoga. So again, I was a little bit surprised here, but, take it into consideration. Then we have Jupiter is the strongest, and this is a Bhikshu Yoga. So this is somebody who's going to have illustrious kind of renunciate status, which, Pope Francis has this one, right? Single staff or symbol, so meaning that they're fairly simple in their accoutrement, I guess, that they wear or present themselves with. And he this is not true for him now as the Pope, but probably up until he gained the popeship, just you know, fairly simple in his accoutrement. I don't know, maybe. Somebody who's engaged in contemplation of the scriptures, in Indian society, this would be typically Vedanta, but for him, the Holy Bible. So this is very true for Pope Francis and high class. So again, Pope Francis is Jupiter, strongest planet, Bhikshu, Pravraja. So if somebody, their strongest planet is the moon, this creates a Vidya or a guru of Pravraja, and this is going to be a celebrated teacher of royal splendor who will travel to various places for pilgrimage. So if the moon is the strongest, like maybe it's exalted in Taurus or, Swa in Cancer. So it looks like Jupiter and Moon produce pretty good, Pravraja yogas, more cushy Pravraja yogas. And then Venus here, if that's the strongest one, this is Charaka, Pravraja Yoga. This is a mendicant traveling over many countries who's a hypocrite, outcast, and public dancer. So that was also a little bit surprising there. So traveling, that might be Venus because Venus does indicate traveling. Mendicant is a little bit surprising because Venus is the planet symbolizes like the finer things of life, parties and, expensive meals and things like that. But if they're a renunciate and they've pulled away from Venus, then they might be, begging for, a change on the street, for example. And then the hypocrite, outcast, public dancer. Well, dancing, the arts is related to Venus. Um, so maybe this is somebody who, dances on the street for a few pennies or something, some change, like people who busk on the street or, but outcast. So outcast, again, this is all these people are going to be outcasts in some ways, even if they're respected, because again, they're set apart from people. Even the Pope, I mean, he's got his shield on, with his Pope mobile and stuff. So even when he drives through crowds and people, he is separate. I mean, he's protected, right? So he does his worldly things and he speaks to people and stuff. But I think most of his life he's on his own. Um, yeah. So hypocrite, maybe. So maybe that's the tension between Venus, which is kind of the opposite of asceticism, right? Venus is kind of the opposite of Saturn in terms of like releasing and letting go of all the finer things of life. So maybe there's somebody who toggles back and forth, again, depending on what other planets are forming this Pravraja yoga, maybe. Then we have Saturn as strongest planet in the Pravraja. This creates a Nigrantha or a Vivasa yoga Pravraja. This is somebody who's running around naked in the hills or forest, outcast and heretic. So this is somebody who's just completely gone off the grid, as far as I can tell. Seems like this is, they don't even wear clothes. They're not engaging in electricity. They don't talk to people. They've just completely renounced everything. Um, and then we have the sun as strongest planet. This creates a Vanyasana or a Vanaprastha yoga, Pravraja yoga. And this is somebody who's rigorous or devout in penance. So this might be, a little bit harsh here if we're talking about penance. And that may be because the sun is constantly shining. So there's this notion, this energy of cruelty associated with the sun. So this somebody is going to be like super rigorous here. And chief lord, the other thing is the sun represents the king or the president. So the chief lord of Saints or sex. So this might, if the sun is the main strongest planet, so maybe sun is in Leo, its own sign, or sun is in Aries, which is its exalted sign. Then we get not only an ascetic, but he's going to be like a lord or chief or president of other ascetics. So, Pope Francis could have had this one, I think, but he had the Jupiter as strongest planet because, again, I think he's a theologian. He's somebody who studied scripture, he's taught, and he came in that way to the popeship. So. So again, more nuance here in terms of how to tease apart the energies of Pravraja yoga. And then here's another example. I wasn't going to go into this one, but I just thought I'd present it. And I have the birth data here if you want to pop it into some software and look at it yourself. But this is an example of somebody who's not a religious or spiritual ascetic or renunciate. This is the birth chart of Julia Child. If you don't know her, she's somebody who was a gourmet chef. Um, she's an American who lived in France, and when she was there, she learned French cooking. And then she spent many years becoming gourmet French chef. And then she wrote a famous book on French cooking, but was written in English, which was one of the first of its kind. It's a best-selling book, even I think to this day. And then she became a television host. So she came up when television was created and and so she had her own television show on gourmet cooking. So she has a Pravraja yoga, as you can see here, and this Pravraja yoga is in the fourth house of home matters. The other thing is she has Sun in its own sign of Leo, so she would have that rigorous yoga. And she was very rigorous. I mean, she learned all these recipes and then she tested that did these recipes over and over and over again, perfecting them. And she took years and years. I think it took her 10 or more years or something to write the book with her buddies, her co-authors or whatever. That's a lot of work. I mean, some people might try to just jam out a book, in this day and age, like in a year, but it wouldn't have the rigorousness and perfectionism that's seen in her work. The other thing to note about her is that she has a planetary war here between Venus and Mercury, because you can see they're in the same degree. But the thing is, they're not her strongest planets. Um, and Mercury is combust. So, if you want to pop this in your software and check it out and look her up, this is another example of non-spiritual Pravraja yoga that makes, again, sense for her. She spent all her time in the kitchen perfecting recipes, basically. And then after years of that, she developed a TV show. But the TV show, the TV show is based on all of this Pravraja yoga stuff. Um, yeah, so there you go. If you want to play around with that, take a look at that one. So as always, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for stopping by to listen to one of my videos. I hope you found this interesting and helpful and useful in your learning of Jyotish, or in learning more about and navigating the own energy cycles of your life. Again, all of my teaching videos on astrology, Vedic astrology, are my concepts playlist. I do offer personal birth chart readings on Zoom. If that's of interest, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com for more information. And I do have another YouTube channel on natural medicine, and the name of that channel is called Nature Source Care. And on that channel, I cover other Vedic arts like Ayurveda and yoga, as well as other paradigms of medicine like homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. So if that's of interest, that's out there as well. So again, thank you for your time, and until the next one, take care. Namaste.